All right, folks, here we go. Wow, 25 people, just like that.
Man.
Amazing.
Damn.
Welcome everyone to tonight's AWE Night LA, our July edition. Just a note, you joined the chat muted. So if you're saying something, don't realize you don't realize that you're muted. Feel free to unmute yourself. But once we start the programming, there will be a Q&A at the end, as well as feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we will try and incorporate them into the conversation. Otherwise, we'll come back to you with them at the during the Q&A at the end of the event. How's everyone doing tonight? Like, is everyone LA based? How far outside of LA are folks joining us from?
New Orleans.
New Orleans, cool.
Hola.
Another New Orleans? Who happens to know the first New Orleans?
But I was in LA for about 20 years.
Ah.
Oakland, California.
Those are the two places, my favorite places I ever lived, New Orleans, and then I moved to Oakland. Both those places, my faves.
Are you still in Oakland?
No, Santa Monica.
Okay.
I'm in Oakland, chiming in. Hi, David.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi. Good to be here. Yeah. You might hear the train out of my window because I'm kind of near the train station. Anyone knows Oakland.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Monterey, very cool. And nice. How many of us is this your first AWE night LA with us?
I'm new.
Yeah, me too.
Me too.
Very cool. Hey, welcome. We put these events on bi-monthly, every other month, not twice a month. Yeah, our next we're going to be having one in July, having one in September, and then our last event of the month of the year will be in November. We'll talk a little more of the upcoming event before we start today. And this fabulous background that both myself and Susan have is our unofficial home in Los Angeles, Phase 2, which is an incredible co-working space. I suspect if you've been to some of our other events, you might have been there, or kind of tech events in general in Los Angeles. Dan, Pete, Lily, Greg, the whole gang there really takes care of us as in the tech community as a whole, and really gives us an opportunity to come together and have mind share, which is really delightful, and in a beautiful space, more importantly.
Yeah, they've been extremely supportive of us, so we want to continue to support them during this time.
Let's see here. What else? We were talking about it kind of on the speaker call beforehand. Who's going to the Unreal event tomorrow? Anyone else attending that? I think it's free. I think you can still get tickets if you're looking for it. And then what else? Virtual Being Summit. I don't know. That's my weird niche of tech. That's on Wednesday. I'm very excited about that. I'll talk a little bit about that before we begin as well. What else is going on next week? Comic-Con at home. Anyone have thoughts on the fact that Comic-Con? I'm a San Diegan. Like, last year was my 26th Comic-Con, unbroken. I've been going since I moved to California as a child. So I am super bummed that there is no physical Comic-Con. But the moment all this stuff started breaking out, I knew that there was no way you could run an event like that.
Oh yeah.
I don't think Hall H would be safe.
It would not. But at least this way, everyone gets into Hall H or whatever the virtual equivalent of it is.
Exactly. Exactly.
And it's free, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool. Chris Bellacci, what's up, man? Thanks for joining. If anything, that's one thing I've noticed that as a result of COVID, like these virtual events are fun because the people that I typically see like all the time going to events, like just being in LA, now I don't get to see them as often. So it's delightful to see them turn up to things, be in Zoom rooms with them, etc.
Right?
And
True
to see
story, man.
people,
Ray, good to see you.
see people
yeah.
from other places too.
Very much so.
Yeah, we had somebody from Tokyo last time.
Yeah, they're waking up right now. Like my Hypersense, my startup, we're primarily Korean, so I have a bunch of team members in Seoul right now, and yeah, like it's morning. We have I have my evening meeting and they have their morning meeting at the same time.
It's kind of neat how easily we can travel, right?
Mhm.
I did a panel in Copenhagen in the morning, New York in the late morning, LA in the afternoon, and I attended a meetup in Tokyo in my evening. So it's kind of a
That's awesome.
running around.
Well, cool. We're just gonna wait a couple more minutes. We'll probably start at the 15, just to let everyone get a chance to join. You know how it is. People kind of come trickling in. They make their they get their dinner. They pour themselves a beer and then they sit down for the event. So yeah, use this as an opportunity to do those things. Go to the bathroom, etc. You know, make yourself comfortable.
Right. There's no excuse about the traffic in LA anymore.
How is the traffic? Is it just non-existent at this point?
No,
Or?
it's not non-existent, but it's not, like normal LA traffic. And I don't go out that much, so I can't.
So on Saturday, I went from Silver Lake to Venice in 30 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, just like.
Yeah, no,
That's always true.
Yeah, like
That's always true.
Saturday morning, I go from Culver City to Griffith Park in 20 minutes.
Well,
Yeah, but that's the opposite direction.
Yeah.
no,
You go through downtown.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
no,
Culver
I'm making-
City, yeah, I could see that, but Silver Lake to Venice, I don't know. It's a little different.
Is that
That's-
45 minutes usually?
On a
That's
good
normally
day.
like an hour,
Yeah.
hour and 20.
Ooh, wow. Okay.
Well, normally because there's so much traffic, it's horrible. Yeah.
Wow.
yeah, no, I'm making it from like Sawtell to downtown in 15.
That's great.
That's crazy talk.
Wait, is that city streets or freeway?
Freeway.
Yeah, that's right. Traffic's really light.
Yeah. But it's not like there's no people on the roads.
No, there are people now.
There's definitely people on the roads.
I've noticed that. Yeah, like traffic is coming back to normal essentially.
Mhm.
People
Although
realize that cars are socially distant.
The funniest thing is seeing people in cars with their masks on.
I know, isn't that strange?
I don't know the protocol. Like, if I am in my car getting food through the drive-through, do I need to be wearing a mask?
You
When
should.
you roll your window down, yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay,
Yes.
that's what I thought. But there's like moments where like I'm like, this is like wearing like a belt and suspenders kind of moment here, you know? Like,
Mhm.
maybe you can never be too safe.
But once you get your food, you can take it off and drive away.
And start eating your fries.
Bag,
There
those
you go.
bag germs
Yeah.
dissipate, you know? That's,
I like your background, Eric. I was using that one for a while.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's cool because it moves and everything.
Yeah.
Have
I'm
you been?
gonna be right back.
I want to check it out, the Northern Lights, one day.
I can't imagine what it even looks like. Like, it's surreal, right? Like something like out of like Lovecraft or something like that.
Pretty much.
I was fortunate enough to see it. I did a summer in Alaska actually hacking fish on a fish line, believe it or not. But the
Wow.
Northern Lights were like the moment. That was the moment. It was
I went
phenomenal.
to Alaska for the Northern Lights, and I went to the Arctic Circle, and it was amazing.
Is it just happen one day a month, or is there some cycle to it? Or?
Sporadic. We had it 4 of
Yeah.
the 5 nights that we were in Alaska, so we were very blessed. But timed the trip around. You can look in advance what the activity is going to be and when the peak periods are, and we timed our trip around the peak periods.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
Nice.
I heard it was kind of a risk to go after the northern lights because you never know if there's too much cloud cover or whatever. So you're saying that it's a pretty good chance if you time your trip correctly,
We got
based on the weather patterns?
We got extremely lucky, but we also went to 3 different locations during that trip and saw it at all 3.
Wow.
Now, does it? I mean, it's random, right? Because it's like whatever, like cosmic rays coming off the sun, bouncing off the atmosphere, or something like that, right? So it's not like the same thing over. It's not like a screensaver, right? Like it's kind of dynamic sort of experience.
Yeah, not the same pattern.
We went to a place called Chenna Hot Springs, which is a natural hot spring, and you're surrounded by ice and snow when you're in this hot spring. But at night, they take you up a mountain at the resort. And so you're in pitch black, and they have a yurt, a big tent set up there, and you hang around in the tent. You drink hot tea, hot chocolate, or ramen noodles, and then they'll come out and they'll come into the tent. They have spotters and say they're active, and then you step outside and you stand at the top of the mountain and take pictures. And if you want to tick people off really quickly, you forget to turn your flash off, and you ruin everybody else's shot, and you'll only do that once.
Is it like you can take it without with your phone camera, like without the flash, you can actually pick this thing up, or is it too?
Yeah, with a flash you won't pick it up, but most people have tripods. Otherwise, they're going to come out a little shaky, and they do long exposure, and it's tricky to get the exposure right. But I got a lot of cell phone pics as well, and the cell phone pics were actually a little more vibrant than my very expensive Canon camera.
Oh,
so it just sends the light differently.
Did you have the cell phone on a tripod as well?
No, and I'm kicking myself for that. The day we went to the Arctic Circle, I forgot the tripod, and I've never forgiven myself for that because that was the most active night. And you don't always see all the colors. Sometimes you see red and purple along with the green. So the red and purples we saw at the Arctic Circle. The others we just saw green. Still beautiful and mesmerizing, and I couldn't feel my hands or my feet, but I didn't want to leave, and they made me get in the van and go. It was just amazing.
It was that cold?
Oh yeah.
Ooh.
It was below 0.
Oh boy.
Oh man.
For a Louisiana girl, that's cold.
For anybody, that's cold.
Yeah, except the Alaskans, they walk around without coats on.
No way. Okay.
Well, nice. Well, before you begin, I want to talk a little bit about something that what I'm working on. My name is Ray Moscow. I'm one of the co-coordinators of the AWE here in Los Angeles, along with Susan. On Wednesday, the Virtual Being Summit is being held. I work for a company called Hypersense, and we are doing stuff in the virtual being space. And we've been working really hard on a product called Hypermeet, which is going to allow you to essentially embody virtual beings with just a webcam. And so we're going to be actually opening up our public beta soon.
Oh, whoa.
But until then, and we're probably going to do that sometime in August. Here's another version of it. But until then, we're actually having kind of like an early beta or pre-beta. If you want to go to hypermeet.com, and it's hyper without the E, hypermeet.com, and you have a PC, probably like a VR ready PC, you can run this application. And if you do, I'd love to hear what you think. It's fun. I hosted the gaming track of AWE last month, or was it 2 months ago now? I guess as a virtual being. There's a lot of talk about this, how it impacts like virtual production and the future of content and things like that. I'm sure we'll end up having a virtual being event sooner or later. But until then, feel free to play with this and let me know what you think. Actually, last week Eric joined me and some other fellow Los Angeles tech folks and immersive storytellers to play a game of Dungeons and Dragons as avatars. So it's part of my talk. The reason we did it was as part of my talk on Wednesday. So once that's after Wednesday, I'll share some of the footage so y'all can see it.
Do you want to share the link, or is it not public?
Oh, sure. It's hypermeet.com. I will put it in the chat.
Is your talk public?
The talk is part of the Virtual Being Summit.
So
but
we couldn't just, we have to have a ticket to the summit.
I believe that's correct. Yes, tickets are still available. Yeah, and then usually, let's see here, what happened. I spoke at the one last year. I think like 2 or 3 months after the event, they usually post the talks online. So hopefully once in a couple months here, that'll be available.
Raymond.
Other than that, Susan, you ready?
I think so. Did you have something, David, before we get started?
Oh, I was just going to ask, are any people thinking about using those for any kind of production animation?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, like, I mean, to talk a little bit about what we're doing, like, you know, we're an SDK, so we integrate into Unity and Unreal. And, you know, we essentially allow you to, we're a real-time facial tracking SDK. So we track faces in real time, we track faces, turn them into real-time meshes that then power virtual beings. And so as a result, people are, you know, using us in Unity and Unreal for a variety of different things, be it storytelling, be it triggering different sort of like interactions with facial expressions and things like that. We're not like a facial recognition company. We don't care who the face is. We just recognize there's a face there, and then we translate the facial movements accordingly. We're really just a motion capture solution. But yeah, I mean, as a result of what's going on now, there's a lot of folks looking how to, you know, bring about the future of content with this sort of technology, as well as like the rise of virtual influencers and, you know, all the other kind of crazy stuff that's going on. So yeah, I mean, if you have any questions about that, just track me down after the event, and I can talk your ear off about it.
Awesome. Nice.
Also, thanks for joining us. Like I mentioned kind of at the beginning, you know, we produce these events every other month. Our next event is going to be in September, focusing on the impact of immersive technology on the upcoming 2020 election. We held this event last year. Phil, who is around here somewhere, was our host last time, and we had a really great conversation about the impact of kind of social media and deep fakes and things like that as it relates to the possible impact on the election last year. And we're going to review what we talked about last time and kind of see what sort of forecasts we made. Did any of them come true? What were some of the things that came as a result of it? And so that's going to be a lot of fun. That's going to be the second Monday in September. I really should have found the date. Does anyone know the date offhand?
The 14th.
The 14th. So look forward to that. But until then, here you are to experience what we have together, or what we put together tonight. So Susan, take it away.
Hi, everybody. I'm Susan Oslin, and I'm going to be your moderator for this evening. We have a really great panel, and I'm excited about this conversation. I think it's a really important conversation, and it won't just end here. Hopefully, it will continue on beyond this evening. I'd like to introduce the panelists quickly, but I'm gonna allow you to introduce yourself, if that's okay. I'm gonna start with you, Jonathan, since you're on my right, according to my view of Zoom.
Absolutely. I'm Jonathan DeArmas. I'm a partner at Diamond. We're a digital agency committed to building media and entertainment experiences with accessibility in the DNA from the start. So I'll be bringing a little flavor about thinking about accessibility and people with disabilities into the conversation while we're talking this evening. We produce a once-a-year report called the State of Accessibility Report. And just one brief stat that we pulled for that report for this year is 2.2 billion people worldwide have a visual impairment. And when we think about XR and that alone, how do we consider even just that in addition to mobility and other things? So I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you. Thank you for being here. Eric, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Eric Elder. I'm a media arts consultant. I focus on the areas of animation, video games, and XR. Spent a lot of time working in production, on pipelines, and also in the education space as well, training people to create content. So great to be here tonight.
Great to have you. Kathleen, would you like to go next?
Hey, everybody, I'm Kathleen Cohen. I'm so happy to be here with these great colleagues. We chatted over the weekend. It was like, oh, my people, this was so good. So thanks, Susan. Thanks, Ray. Thanks, Phase 1. Greg. Phase 2. Did I say Phase 1? Jesus. Okay, this is it. This is like, don't quote me, all right? Anyway.
Greg is on yet, so.
I'm your in-house digital embalmer. Anyway, yeah, that's been my recent title. But I have a consultancy called The Collaboratorium. We're XR immersive strategists, experienced designers, and it's sort of threefold. I've been on the journey on the speaking circuit talking about meeting your digital twin, about your likeness and legacy when you are living, and of course, when you pass away. As well as I focus on research with something I'm calling the Virtual Human Index, which is products and services associated with your likeness and your legacy. And then third, I focus on different verticals, in particular, the AEC, architect, engineering, and construction business in helping to support any physical build with a persistent world. That's it.
Okay, thank you so much, Kathleen. And Arturo, our resident ethics expert.
No, that would be a PhD title there, which I am not.
Okay.
But, it is a favorite subject of mine, so thank you for inviting me here. I'm the CEO of Kluge, and we're a design company. We also build our own VR products, one of them being Synth Riders, which is a rhythm game. It's in my background, so if you put your hands here, you imagine those controllers, those are rails, and you would dance to the beats. And so that's been really fun, and we're building some other VR products. And I also run a lot of this kind of design events in the AI space and in design related to ethics. So it's been a passion of mine. I've gotten some informal training out of it, and I've looked at all of the different ethical frameworks. And for me personally, I really like virtue ethics because it is about the person. It considers the individual, and it gives you sort of a rather than try to create an algorithm about how to create the best ethical system, it understands the nuances of the human being, and it gives you something to sort of confront with and reflect on every day and be better. So I like to think not only about what is a good technology, because that's really hard, but also what makes a good technology is, which is something we have more control over.
Exactly. So we have two special guests also that I'm going to introduce a little bit later. So for now, we're just going to get started. Let me just say a little bit about myself. I'm the co-organizer with Ray, who is taking on the persona of a young girl tonight. And you have a twin, Ray, if you noticed in the audience. So I am a UX designer. I've been a UX designer for the past 12 years, and then I've been in the VR space for about 2.5 years. And so I'm really interested in the human aspect of experiences. And when I started to get into virtual reality, I realized that there's a lot of like really scary things that could happen with virtual reality in terms of not knowing what's real and how we have deep fakes coming about. And there's so much more about that down the line. And I realized it was really important to go beyond thinking about the user experience and really more broadly about how what we're doing now is going to have a larger impact, you know, in the society as a whole. So I've been interested in that topic, and along the way I've met some of these amazing people who are also interested in the topic. So we're coming together tonight to have a conversation about ethical considerations for emerging technology. So I'd like to just start out to say that I think we all understand the power that's in our hands right now, or maybe we don't understand. We understand that we don't understand it is probably more accurate to say that there's a lot of places the future could go with the technologies that we're dealing with. And so what do we do? How do we as individuals impact the path of making sure it goes in a direction that's good for everybody? And that's kind of like broadly where we're gonna talk. And so I know that's very broad, but that's kind of a starting point. I know all of these panelists have some ideas, their own ideas about that. So let's start there and then we'll dig in. Kathleen, I know you have a lot of ideas.
How did I know you were going there? First off, should we just address that Layla's not joining us?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I apologize. So we had another panelist scheduled for this evening, Layla, and she had an emergency with her family and wasn't able to make it. So she gives her apologies, and we miss her and wish her family well. Thank you, Kathleen.
Yeah. No worries. Well, we had such a good conversation over the weekend.
Yeah.
You know, she's present, even though she's not present, which leads to the whole point here, human potential, right? You know, how do you show up and have both, and how do you have everything and have it all in this crazy new world? But I started over the weekend talking about, you know, the idea that virtual beings or digital humans and the metaverse go hand in hand like waves and particles. You can't talk about one without the other. And what's our role in it? And in my point of view, this is a sort of a trifecta. It's me and my relationship to the world, is my relationship to the next person I'm talking to, and what's our relationship to the environment that we're in. It's those three areas that I look at and say, okay, so, you know, ethics is a really big word. And recently I was asked to be on a board for a company called HoloRide, and VentureBeat said, and Kathleen Cohen is she's representing ethics. I was like, well, that sounds like I'm a lawyer. What is that? So, it's a big word to digest. And having been somebody who's gone through so much human potential workshops, I'm done with potential. I'm looking at human transformation. So what are the actions associated going into this newfound space? And, you know, I always say, are we fixing or trying to fix systemic world problems going into this newfound space? Because right now, with all the neuroethics out there, and I just saw the movie today, I Am Human. I don't know if anybody has seen it, that was by Taryn Southern and Brian Joseph or Johnson with Kernel Lab, I think in Los Angeles. He's been he's coming out with a wearable brain interface in 2021. But this whole concept around neuroethics, like we might in 20 years have the opportunity to say, let's not just step in somebody's shoes, but we actually can see how somebody feels. We can actually say we want to maybe be happier in life. Maybe we want to be more ambitious. Maybe we want to be somebody else. For, you know, that just opens up a whole new dialogue for the next 25 years. And that's where I put my milepost. So I'm going to leave it there and pass the torch and say, I talk about between now and the next 25 years and what that evolution is up to the so-called singularity, if you believe that or not. But, you know, Facebook saying 10 years, brain interfaces, the next 20 years, we'll be able to step in people's shoes empathetically in a very different way, not even VR. So I'm sort of going to pass the ball forward and say, that's kind of where I start is, okay, now what?
Who would like to respond or continue? Catch the ball. Eric, I know you have some ideas about where the metaverse is going and how we might get there.
Sure. Well, again, ethics for me, you know, breaks down really simply in terms of, you know, what's right and what's so it's a moral question, and I think what we're dealing with is a lot more complex than that. So I think it's a bigger conversation, and it really does depend on the individual. So, you know, we're looking at things from each individual user, and then the perspective of the corporations that are, you know, funding, you know, XR production and creating these virtual spaces, and then everything in between. And, you know, definitely one of the issues is, you know, who is building the metaverse? I know we talked a little bit about, you know, that's the metaverse itself is hard to define, right? Like, is there one or is there many? Are we talking about, you know, interdimensionality? You know, I think it's going to be a long time before we have a kind of shared definition of exactly what that is. But just in terms of, you know, one thing I used to always think about and talk to my students about years ago was this idea that eventually the internet will become a 3D space, right? And somebody's going to need to build that space. And that, 10, 15 years ago, as they were, becoming environmental artists and, game engineers and designers, that it would most likely, be them. They would be in a position when that time, came. And so when you talk about, who's going to be building this metaverse and using that trajectory from the video game industry, statistically, Black people make only 1% of the people who make video games, who work at companies, big companies like Sony and Activision and EA. Yet we are, proportionately the ones who play video games more than any other racial group. So, there's been a lot of attention lately, of course, with, what's been going on in the headlines. A lot of corporations are ponying up and saying that they're taking new actions to, address diversity and not just give it, kind of lip service. But we'll see. We'll see what happens over the next couple of years. It definitely feels different. But there definitely has also been a concern since I've been involved in the space for the last couple of years that if Black people, brown people, people of different groups that aren't traditionally in the space are not building the metaverse, and they will be left out of it, like we are often left out of the current media. So it's definitely a concern. It's something that I'm, really dedicated to making a difference with. I'm having a conversation with Epic Games right now to actually launch a program in Compton to train people on the students there on the Unreal Engine using virtual laptops. So, I know this is something that a lot of people have been interested in on many different levels, government, at the community college level, at the high school level. Being an educator is kind of easy for me to say, but I think it's true. It definitely does start with education. So it's the training first, and then once you have enough, individuals that have the skills, then they at least have a chance to enter these opportunities that are emerging. And there's going to be a lot of them in the 3D virtual space, and having skills like understanding how to use tools like Unity and Unreal.
Absolutely. Yeah, so that was a lot too. You brought up a lot of good points and a lot of different areas that I hope we can touch on. Yeah, and even before education is an environment that pulls for education, right? So yeah. Jonathan, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. I was thinking that, we touched on the building out of, what's coming, and, the education for the people who, to get into the space, to become those developers, but also folks who are in the space already. There's an aspect of education that kind of touches on the ethics conversation, where it's one thing to have a set of your moral principles that govern your business behavior and what you choose to build and what audience you choose to go after and who you choose to include. But oftentimes I notice in the accessibility space, particularly, a lot of business owners, up until lawsuits start occurring, don't even seem to be aware of the space. So it makes me think, the examples of finding and educating that next group of developers, it's also, in these same areas that we're going to talk about, how do you educate the business? You can't expect business to necessarily pick altruistic goals, but in the accessibility space, for instance, you can perhaps affect the choices of a business based on, okay, let's not talk about just being inclusive. Let's talk about larger audience, more customers, bigger revenue, right? So there's kind of a yin and yang to approaching how do you affect those decisions, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I say one thing about that really quick?
Of course.
Jonathan, to your point, they're jackhammering right now. By the way, it's 7 o'clock outside my door. So if it's too loud, just tell me to put this on mute. But like, of course, right now. My point that you were about to say is, having been somebody who's been very involved with the disability community and the accessibility community, and watching all these new immersive companies be very spot on and recognize how necessary it is to be accessible. However, what we've revealed is all their traditional materials, all their web mobile materials they're not accessible. So here they are, because that was just to get funds for them. That was for them to get funding for their AR, VR projects, whatever it is. So while they are recognizing it forward, they're not cleaning it up backward. So do you spend that time and go backward, or do you spend that time keep forging forward? So I just want to pin that, because I think it's really important to recognize, because you don't want to shame anybody. And then you're like, you're moving the wheel though. So where do you go with that?
That's an excellent point.
Arturo.
Yeah, so my learning about ethics, and I love Kathleen the way you framed it. It's a big meaty thing, and we have to be. It's a weight, it's a responsibility, right? But it's also, to me, it seems like, unfortunately, it calls for reflection. And I say unfortunately because for business and technology, that's inconvenient, because it slows us down. But we shouldn't be afraid to slow down. And I think there's a lot of, especially in particular in the XR space, and believe me, I was building synth riders in 2017 when VR was the butt of everybody's joke. And I know I didn't like the market that much, but nonetheless, to be slow and to take things, give them space to think and to figure it out, I think it's important. And so I'm in no hurry to get to this metaverse, and in some way we already are there, right? But I think that there's something great about taking our time, and I think in VR in particular, we were talking about this in the weekend, that I see it as a golden era right now, because it's the time of independence, and all the big titles. I'm in the gaming side of things, but we're all independent. The biggest game in VR right now was started by a two-man studio. So that's great. I think for us, when we were coming out with synth riders, Oculus did not ask us how many numbers we had. They just look at the polish of the game. They judge the thing in itself. And so it's like, how refreshing to be on the home hero of the biggest store of VR and not be judged by how, did I work for Disney before I made this, or whatever it is. I think there's a value in the independence. So when we talk about inclusivity, I also think of the small businesses and autonomous voices, right? It's really all inclusive, and really think about the different sizes and not just the corporations. So it's nice to see this working together right now. And the last thing I wanted to add to this, besides the reflectiveness and the pace, the other thing is, I think as we think about this metaverse, there's something about really exciting that we're on Zoom, and I agree with that. And it's been really exciting with COVID, all these digital experiments that we're doing, but there's something so refreshing in going to the beach and going to a hike and seeing each other face to face, person to person, that I think the metaverse will never replace. So that hybrid, right, is experiencing that existence gave us something. When you look at nature and you stare into it, you stare into the unknown. And when you're in the metaverse, you stare and you wander into the genius of man. And so we have to keep feeding on the unknown to keep building things for men. But if we just keep building on man's thought on itself, if we insulate ourselves and kind of build a roof over just our own thought, and take away that beautiful unknown, I think we're in trouble. So I think it's the hybrid of the life in the unknown and the world that we're building together.
Great. So there's so many places to go. The one place I think that's sticking out for me, because we actually did an event last year on it, last September, is the fact that how important it is for us to not build the metaverse, not build the future with the gamers and the developers, but how important it is, especially, I love the work that you're doing, Kathleen, with the architects and the urban planners. And there's a lot of new fields of study around urban planning that are very interesting, that really look at the impact on society. And so I think those collaborations are going to be really, really key And I don't think that the metaverse should be built by gamers, because it's not going to have the element that you're talking about, Arturo, of being reflective and incorporating the unknown with just the code itself. So I think that's really important. And so what kind of collaborations are you doing right now? Where do you see yourself in terms of partnerships that you're hoping to make? Eric, I know you have a lot of really great partnerships that you're working on, and I'd love for you to share more about that. And I know, Jonathan, you're moving into new areas, and so let's talk about partnerships and how that's moving you forward, and hopefully how that's helping to move us into a better place forward. Eric, why don't you start and talk about, I know you have some really exciting things going on. You mentioned a little bit about your work in Compton, but that's really much more global.
Yeah, so I've also been the last couple of years doing work in the Caribbean, primarily in Trinidad and Tobago, and doing media training there, and then also in Africa for the last couple of years, been building relationships in like Ghana, Nigeria, and a few other places there as well. You know, there's a lot of talent that's there on the continent, and a lot of desire to be in the video game industry. And again, training is definitely one of the big, you know, roadblocks that they have, which, you know, again, all of the work that is kind of rapidly being developed now with online learning definitely makes things a lot more accessible. Again, this class that we're going to do in South LA can easily be accessed to, well, I say easily, there are some challenges, but once it's developed, it makes it a lot more possible to deliver it over in different parts of Africa as well. You know, they're also dealing with things like, you know, having access to internet, having access to reliable, you know, electricity, depending on what part you were in. But one of the exciting things there is that, you know, only 1% of, you know, the multi-billion-dollar market, I think a couple years ago was like somewhere around $142 billion video game market worldwide. And all of Africa, which is close to 1 billion people, and, you know, one of the youngest populations on the planet, where there's a lot of love for games, you know, there's just a lot of potential there. So it's the last emerging market. And again, we're just talking about games. We're not talking about the other, you know, avenues and verticals of virtual. So there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity there.
Right, and one of the things that you were talking about also is that maybe moving the needle in terms of creating opportunity and diversifying the workforce here in the United States. It's difficult, even, you know, there's a lot of attention on it, but like you said, we'll see where it goes. And that one way that you're moving the needle is actually moving out into other markets. And so I think that that's really powerful. Jonathan.
Yeah, absolutely. In the areas that my company Diamond's particularly looking at right now is how can we participate in the conversation, maybe move the needle in that accessibility in the XR community. So there's organizations like XR Access, the W3C is working on XR standards, and even now. There are meetups, literally search for meetup, A11Y, it's accessibility shortened. And you're gonna find, the first one that really I started attending was based out of Tokyo. It's tough to get to, but there are more popping up. But really, honestly, it's, yes, Thomas Logan, forgive me. Yes, and so it really, it's like, make a lot of noise out there and try to see what echoes back and latch on, because right now this is where this conversation starts.
Absolutely. So Arturo, you talked about your partnership with Oculus. And it's funny how we talk about Oculus and we pretend like it's actually not Facebook and that Oculus has a whole different persona than Facebook does. But you talked about it being a very positive, a symbiotic relationship that you feel really good about. And so talk to us a little bit about that and how you want to stay small and why, and do you see your partnership with Oculus making any kind of a dent in terms of a conversation around ethics?
Yeah. So, well, the last part may be trickier, right? But I think I think it's possible. Maybe over drinks with Oculus. But I think, you know, for Kluge, collaboration is maybe our core value. Like I think it's our core value. Like we're a cross-functional team. Kluge, the design company, it's 13 people, and we work on 14 or so projects at the same time, and we don't have assigned resources. Everybody's just doing it. And it makes for a very collaborative company. We're very much about like, let's play, let's co-create, let's do this together. And we've really brought that spirit over to synth writers. In fact, we just did a collab with another rhythm game called O-Shape from Spain, and we went all in and we put together, you know, syncing up the same map, the same song, licensing it together and promoting it together with Oculus and our two account managers. We actually put them side by side in the collab and took a photo of them and really brought that spirit of collaboration to the whole thing. So it's just a deep value of ours. And I think one of the joys of the modern era is how much collaboration is possible, right? And so I try to, just to even broaden it even further, like the reason I do ethics events is so that I can work with PhDs and collab with them and learn what their point of view is, right? So I love community. I love these conversations. I love all of it. And if anybody wants to collaborate, believe me, I'm all in. And so I think with Oculus, so for example, that collab came as a result of us doing some sleuthing. They had Peros in a bundle, and we sort of said like, hey, you Peros in a bundle, what if we do this? And we did it within like 5 days leeway. Everybody on the outside thought Oculus thought this through, but it was us that put it in front of them, and they were down to play. So I think it set the tone. I hear now in the back that Oculus is now thinking about ways to make collabs more official, and we set the standard. We were the first, and I think that's what we bring to the table. Now we're talking about collabing with somebody else and inside of the Oculus machine, and I think the opportunity there is that, of course, it's Facebook, but it is still small enough to be separate from Facebook, and they're still like personable and fairly small for how big Facebook is, right? So I think there's a time right now when all they're doing is talking to independent studios and making things happen together. And there's a joke about how messy they are in some way, but that's the advantage because it's human and there's no algorithm behind it, and everything's changing. So for me, this is the time to really do some stuff, you know, and maybe influence for the good.
That's awesome. And what comes to mind for me is like, for now. Right?
That's right. That's right. And that's a good ... right there. But I think it's like, this is the foundation. This is the beginning. So let's bring as much good ethos as we can so that it stays.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's so awesome that you're the one bringing it.
Trying.
So
a quick shout out, actually, excuse me, Susan, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
A quick shout out to Arturo's synth writers, because I turned that thing on the first time and this left-hander was super happy because I was able to, it's one of my biggest pet peeves in the XR space is like turning on the app and then not being able to use my left hand. But realistically, you guys have done a lot of work all through the menu system and considering users of all abilities. So shout out for that.
Thank you, man. And we have a singing mode coming up on Thursday, so that we're excited about that.
Singing mode?
Sitting mode, so you'll be able to play sitting down, which has all sorts of, I mean, it's going to help a lot of people. So
I don't want to derail the thread, but I also know that it's really interesting, Arturo, how you do your sort of user experience research. You want to just hit on that quickly since it got brought up, and I really love this because it speaks to your spirit of collaboration, I think, too.
Yeah, I mean, the other piece, you know, Oculus was a big help on one end, but the other piece was when we were building this, we needed a market. And so we quickly found out gamers were in Discord. And for us, Discord became our everything. And then here there were these streamers, and we literally sometimes sit there like for 10 hours just typing away on Twitch, like, okay, do this, do that, do this. And that's how the game was built. So it was as HCD as it goes, you know, and it's still that spirit to this day. We just celebrated our 2-year anniversary yesterday, and it was all like the message that we gave. We put this video, and it's like, this game is yours, and we really mean it. I mean, without them, we wouldn't have built it, or we couldn't have built it, because we didn't build it for scale. We had no idea it would be successful.
Yeah, I love that story. So Kathleen, you are actually someone who is, my vision of the metaverse is more the 3D version that you talked about, Eric. And so I really see you as someone who's making an impact in that area because you're actually working in AEC. And that's where I'd like to see a lot of it coming from. So talk to us about your partnerships and where you see that going, the kinds of people you're interacting with.
Yeah, this all started because after I was like the senior producer of launching DisneyWorld.com 2.1 and that release. And after we released that, and Bob Iger was sort of looking at our division saying, there's something about WD Pro, the way these guys think in here, we need to team them up with Imagineering. And, you know, Imagineering's like, hands off. And we were like, oh, we're all in. We think a little different. And, you know, the quest at the time was re-architect Epcot with new technology. So what the hell does that mean? Well, that was the beginning of, you know, the Magic Band. And the reason why that was so important for me is that, you know, I was a traditional public muralist. I was a glassblower, a public muralist, you know, artist who cared about when you paint a mural in New Orleans, by the way, versus painting one in Boston. It's a big difference of community and who has input and who you're painting it for. And you're doing historical, you know, research before you choose to paint something, and it becomes everybody's product. So that got me really interested, where I ended up at Disney thinking, oh, I'm going to help re-architect Epcot. Why don't I just pull the ripcord and do this myself? And it's a little bit of IoT, it's a little bit of creative arts, it's, you know, placemaking, it's urban developers, and let's start working with these folks. And the word du jour at the time was big data. Everybody was pushing big data. And, you know, what was really interesting is I spent a lot of years trying to understand what is innovating public space with new technology. That was my big idea. And I joked because everybody thought, so you're doing surveillance. And I was like, no, does everybody see the light? It's happening all over Asia. Are we not there yet? Like, this device is going to be able to engage with everything around us. Who's thinking about this space? And while nobody was physically in that space from the architecture side, I ran to New York to talk to agencies because I'm like, I'll sell snake oil at this point. It's vaporware. The agencies will just sell the big idea. Nobody's delivering on it, so maybe I should join them. And then the recession hit, and I'm like, well, this is crap. What am I going to do now? So what I found, this whole idea, everybody was focusing on data. I found myself speaking to ULI, the Urban Land Institute, and to the Entertainment Development Council in particular. And what I found, it was a talk about your visitor in a digital era. And if you didn't know this, land developers and builders, your visitor is going to curate an experience on your property. Do you want to have a say in it? Do you want to look at all the data that's coming in and out of your property and begin to architect and curate it and experience back to them? So I started there. I really thought they all knew about big data. I couldn't get 5 minutes into my talk before all the hands went up saying, what's big data? And I was like, oh my God, this is where we're starting? These guys are building the 100-year-old educational facility. I'm thinking, what? This is like, I'm new to the game with, I was at O'Reilly's Structured Data Conference, and MetLife was there talking about, you know, the Infinity Project of how they'll capture data for you in your life along with a life insurance policy. I'm like, well, if MetLife gets it, urban land development, those guys must get it too, right? No, they didn't. And this was the attitude. Kathleen, until it smacks us in the face, it's a big rabbit hole. Our social media person's handling it. I'm like, oh my God, okay. No, your IT person shouldn't handle it. Your social media person should not handle this. Maybe you have a digital strategist who might be close to this conversation at the time. So I found myself as like a big data strategy girl. Well, no girl wants to be a big data girl, period. No girl wants to be big anything. So I was like, this is awesome. Then Snowden happens and all the big data and everything I could be working on goes right out the door because everybody's freaking out on NSA and privacy. And I was like, well, this is insane. So all this to tell you a couple things. In that period of transition between big data and what the hell am I going to do right now as a consultancy, seeing this milepost out there, I worked on an AR project that was spatial mapping pathways with people with visual impairment. Showed at AWE, big success. All of the money that came to the table was all AEC people. They're like, well, screw the 200 million people with visual impairment. And that was the number, by the way, Jonathan, they gave at the time. And there's a big difference between blindness and visual impairment. Screw that. We want you to put all of your software into the AEC industry because there's a 20% delta between the blueprint and the build. And we need to close that gap, and this software will solve that. So, hey, company, forget your mission. It's money here. Are you going to play? And of course, the company folded because they were like, no, we're not going to play your big dollars. This is mission. The CEO's sister was blind, and this was a passion project. So coming full circle, I came back to ULI in 2019. Now I'm pitching immersive worlds. The hands go up again. Wait a second. We have a VR guy in here who deals with that, who does something like what maybe it's previs for us to show our clients. I'm like, no, 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 no. For every build physically you're building, you should be hand delivering a persistent world right on top of it. You should be able to sell them not only the digital twin of all their industrialization, their systems, whether it's emergency services or whether it's operational health data, but on top of it, there's a whole media and entertainment play. And you can talk about, you know, Entertainment Development Council with all of their tracks, whether it's sports stadiums or theme parks or FECs or, you know, location-based, you know, builds, all of it, we have to start looking at this differently. So the same questions are coming up. We don't have somebody like you in-house, Kathleen, that thinks like this. We don't know who that person is. We need a strategist. So it's as important for me to look at what SIGGRAPH and academia is doing in pace setting, organizational development from the top down and the bottom up around these very big subjects and how to get action and traction, as it is moving it to the corporate side and getting that investment as well. So somewhere between there, I'm sitting in both camps wondering right now, where's my value right now? Because these guys aren't willing to invest. So the last thing I'll say is COVID, best thing that ever happened in the entire world. Now the phone is like ringing nonstop. Wait, you're that girl. I'm like, I was that girl. I'm still that girl. So are you really like, you know, you're going to write a check now? Well, we don't know. Can you build an educational facility in an immersive world by the fall, Kathleen? Why? Because you need it? Yeah, badly you need it. And everybody's freaking out. And so in a way, we're all moving the wheel here. The action's happening. It's happening to us and we're caught up in it. So I'm just as interested in this group being the pace setters and the action, you know, taking action along the lines of how do we move this wheel in 1 year with COVID, in 2 years with COVID, because everyone's like 2022 will be a hell of a year. That's going to be when we're all out of the dark, I guess. And where's that going to be? Are we being forced into these immersive conversations because of COVID? Now we all have to react fast. Are we being agile in it? And now we're, you know, sort of, you know, the circumstances are defining it for us. So that was a lot. I took us on a whole journey, I know, but that's how my brain thinks.
You did. That was definitely a lot.
That was a preach. That was a little preachy. Sorry.
That's okay.
Passionate.
You have a lot to say, so let's bring it on. Let's hear it. I think, Eric, too, you were mentioning that recent events, not so much COVID, but well, I think a combination of COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement is possibly making a shift in where money is available. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just one thing I like to pick up from with what Kathleen was sharing about. We recently had a client, Boy Scouts of America, and that they, you know, wanted to have their summer camp, but due to COVID, weren't actually able to have it live, and you know, were wondering, you know, how they could provide some type of interactive experience for campers. And so, you know, with only, like, I think we started the conversation 3 weeks before camp was to start. And they were considering trying to build something and wanted to know what that would take and how much it would cost. And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You do not want to be building, you know, a platform, really any type of software with only 3 weeks and you know, expect anything, you know, reliable. And so let's find, you know, an existing solution for you. So we went with Mozilla Hubs, which we had a great experience with. You know, I don't know how many people have you know, toyed with it at all, but you know, one of the great things is that you can access it on your laptop, you can access it on your phone, and it's a 3D virtual space, and you can also access it in a VR headset. And you know, again, I could be in the headset, you could be on your phone, and we could interact with avatars in the same space. The graphics are very simple because, again, it has to run on a mobile phone or a low-end device. But that's also what makes it very accessible. And I could see, you know, that, you know, the graphical quality is going to improve, and the amount of features that a platform like that has is going to increase, you know, dramatically over the next couple of years as more people get used to it. But one of the other cool things is that they have, you know, you can pull in assets from a Google library. So anybody can create these really low poly assets, and then you can just like literally just point and click and bring it in. So it's very accessible to young people to build their own spaces. So what we did was we basically replicated their physical camp spaces, and the campers are there. Now, as you can imagine, the campers are doing all kinds of things in there that, you know, we could not anticipate. And so, you know, we're very much going back and forth with them and debriefing after each session, but they've already really gotten excited about the possibilities there, and looking to see, you know, what this can be in the future. And we're talking about different games, and again, we've had other conversations too with people who are either teaching a class or having some type of conference and event, and they want to go beyond this, you know, a Zoom conference, right, where everybody's looking at each other on screens, and like, how can we be more interactive? Another cool thing that the Hubs has is spatial sound, which is really interesting because it kind of replicates, you know, the sensation that you have when you're in a physical space, and, you know, you can't hear somebody that's talking across the room until you go over to them physically and can actually hear that way. So yeah, just a lot of interesting things that have come out of these early experiments. Yeah, again, I'm just looking at all the different, you know, kind of possibilities that could come out of that. And, you know, definitely with, I mean, I think we saw in the headlines today that, you know, LAUSD is not going to open back up. So, you know, again, like from the summer camp and all the summer programs that we've had conversations about, a lot of conversations about, you know, how to, you know, deal with the classroom and with virtual learning during this time. So.
Can I say one quick thing on that too?
Sure.
It'll be like a blip. Eric, on Mozilla Hubs, which we did for VRTO, it's the integrations that are there and embedded are great solutions to have. And of course, all that has to get worked and refined and what have you.
Yep.
For the architects that can't close a project interview, which is like an agency pitch, in Zoom, they can't do it on a Brady Bunch screen. They need some kind of depth and environment, but they need that kind of high fidelity. So I chose for them to work with, let's say I used my Rees out of Norway to say, hey, let's get some real-time virtual sets in here so they can walk around inside a building together and begin to explore what they've built in Revit and, you know, carry it over and say, hey, now we can actually walk through the space. So that's a level up. So I see the value proposition for Hubs as much as I see real-time broadcasting that might not have those same integrations, but they have that kind of fidelity, and that's the trade-off. So that's the only thing I wanted to point out.
Yeah, no, totally. And again, I was able to get over to, I think it's Sony Innovation Labs and look at and I was really surprised actually when I got there and saw that they were using the Unreal Engine, which, you know, makes sense that they're making the investment in Unreal, right? But there's just amazing possibilities, what you can do with the technology. And again, it seemed like the plan that they were making there was to, you know, before all of this stuff happened, was to get these captures of these different set pieces from all over so that they can totally make these virtual productions, which again, now that we're, in this kind of, new age, how big and important virtual production is getting.
So I want to put a pin in your mention of the campers did all kinds of things you didn't expect them to do.
Yeah.
I definitely want to bring that into the conversation. So, but I'm going to put a pin in that right now because I want to get back to the concept of collaboration. And I want to introduce one of our special guests, David Benjamin. So hi, David.
Hello.
I met David in Esalen. I don't know if you've been to Esalen. If you haven't been, you have to go. It's absolutely my favorite place. And on a retreat where it was a technology retreat, but because it was Esalen and the nature of Esalen is really about, inner work and spirituality and like that kind of stuff, all mixed in with technology. So it was really fascinating. And we talked a lot about ethical considerations for technology. And so that's kind of the relationship that I have with David. That's how we met. And also just the whole spirit of collaboration. And I believe it's so important moving forward that I think we're coming from the age where technology got into the hands of everybody, so everybody could be a movie producer and everybody could be an animator or whatever. And now we're getting to a place where the technology is so complex that you really can't do it alone anymore. And the need to collaborate is so high. And I think that that spirit of collaboration is really going to be the thing that that's the way that we can move the needle forward in terms of possibly in terms of ethics and considerations and good versus bad. And as we collaborate more in the spirit that you're talking about, Arturo, I really love your spirit and the way your company is going. So David, as a member of my community, I bring you in. I kind of like the spirit of community is why I'm having these guests co-moderators in the spirit of community. And, you have something to offer this conversation. So take it away.
All right. Well, yes, fascinating hearing everybody's perspectives. And when I think about ethics, I want to start on today's web because that's where we're at right now. And yes, I know we're moving very quickly towards the spatial computing, extended reality, and other ways of interacting. But my real concern is that we've done such a horrible job on the web. I'm concerned that we're going to be bringing those same practices over to the new emerging technologies. And I could probably, mention 20 problems from fake news, privacy, information sovereignty, lack of consent, exploitation, abuse. I mean, I could keep on going on and on and on about what's happening in the web environment. And despite the fact that these problems are like in the forefront of our news, in our entertainment, it's permeating through our culture. Yet at the same time, it doesn't really seem like there's a will to deal with it even in today's internet. So I think it's great that we're starting to have these conversations about ethics in the new realities. And at the same time, I'm wondering how we get there. If we can't do it for this web, how do we prevent these problems from basically migrating? If the same structural things are in place that enabled this to happen on the web, how do we prevent those same structures from coming over to the new realities? So I'd love to hear people's perspectives on that.
I don't have an answer, but I just want to speak to, I was on the web with IRC and Alta Vista. And I love those days. I miss those days very much. because it was more independent, more countercultural, and there was the spirit of, I don't know, that felt like the real web. And then Slack and Discord came and took the IRC thing and made it into a product. But you know, I think that we're still in those days in VR, and I think that's what I like about it, right? And I don't know how we avoid the systemic problem of scale and corporate ownership taking over. And it's not only to blame it on the corporation. I think we're partially to blame because we have a bit of a fascination for corporations as well. But I think like today, like this week, I read or saw one of those YouTube videos that's doing the weekly VR updates and talking about the advertisement and VR advertisement coming, and how eye tracking is really going to help make this such a robust piece of data. And right now we don't have any of that, right? You don't log into any app and see a bunch of ads, like, whereas you go into any website and it slows down because of all the ads that are coming in. So I don't know how to avoid it, but I'm just pointing out that there's something about pre-monetization and post-monetization and pre-scale and post-scale that is inevitably changes it.
Did you guys see the interview with, I don't know what they call him, but I want to say Patient W. He's the first patient from Wuhan in the market. Did you happen to catch his interview like 2 weeks ago? He said pre-COVID and he was saying where he thought he got it when he was playing cards with his other guys in the market, what have you. And he said, it used to be about getting a buck in the market. China used to be about the dollar. Now China's currency is happiness. And if COVID did anything to shift that, and it's either temporary or not, I'm curious to see if it's a seismic shift or not. But I thought it was pretty provocative. Or, you know, we can talk and talk and talk all day long about this. And every, 5 years, 10 years, everyone's talking about the actions. And we don't want to carry over comic books to video games. We don't want to carry over TV to web. We don't want to carry over web to VR. It just keeps going and going and going. And there's no proof yet that, even AI is going to smack us in the face and say, hey, this is the best you've got, people. Look at yourself. And we're still going to be throwing it up against a wall. So this is where I say the neuroethics of all of this and all these brain interfaces are really going to make a difference, whether good or bad too, I know. But I'm just curious if things are going to change seismically, after COVID.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think this whole notion of, the problems in one area being brought on to the next, that's one way of thinking about it. And then the other thing is to think about, well, what are the unique ethical issues that are just part of the XR, AR new realities? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I think in addition to, I talk a lot about accessibility on this call so far, but I really do play with just about every new experience I can get my hands on, every new gadget and things. And, I think somebody else might have the actual stat on this one, but you talk about the retention rate for education learning in reading versus watching a YouTube video versus a lecture versus actually experiencing a training or something for the first time in VR, and that retention rate is through the roof. So I really think about, all the ways that could be used. My particular case, just very basic, was learning how to use a DJ set in less than 5 minutes in VR and remembering how to do it even today, which is 2-3 years after the fact. Now, if somebody could teach me a value like that, how dangerous is that? Or how useful is that? And that's kind of where I'm going. It's not the physical skills necessarily, but all the other things implied in these experiences that you're consuming.
Yeah, and it seems with accessibility that you're going to have, there's so many more ranges of motion that are necessary to be adept in the new realities, the XR, the AR, compared to the web, which is, just typing, seeing, and hearing probably for the most part. Is that part of your equation, Jonathan?
I guess one slightly related example would be an experience that's been around a couple of years called Notes on Blindness. And by going through that experience, you're listening to the audio recordings of a person who's losing his sight, and it's really immersive in how they handle it, and they put visuals to it, and you can see the sounds and try to give you an understanding of what it may be like to be visually impaired or blind. But I'm seeing the sound with my eyes, so can I really understand?
The other thing is, well, I was on a call this morning. It was for the OpenAR cloud, and they were discussing, ethical it wasn't ethical, but it was privacy and compliance in spatial computing, and they were speaking to the fact that there was so much more data in the new realities. I mean, obviously there's a lot of data when we're being tracked on the web, and everywhere we go, et cetera. But the level of data in comparison is just mind-boggling. The amount of data that will be possible for corporations and others to get a hold of when you're talking about doing something in either a virtual world or even the physical reality. So it seems like there's going to need to be even more emphasis or focus on getting that right in the virtual world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely brings up, major issues of responsibility in terms of ethics. I remember talking to someone at, I think it was like the Magic Leap Developers Conference, and they were all excited about, when you put a Magic Leap on your head, all of the biometric data that you could collect from when somebody's having an experience, right? And then just in terms of building content, like, when VR is done right, it could just have a very extreme, emotional impact on you. I mean, you take, anything that we could see on a screen in terms of like a movie, like, or TV, like, watching a murder or, graphic violence, and just any type of extreme experience. And you, again, put that in the hands of the right designers, the same type of content, and make it immersive, and it could have really damaging, I think, impacts on people. And I think as developers, you really have to be, responsible. I mean, just in terms of, all the conversations we were having just about like things like sim sickness and being responsible for, how you move your users through experience, and then just, extrapolate that out into the future. I mean, these are, I think there's going to need to be, a set of standards that needs to get created. And again, it's going to take time, and there's going to have to be, a lot more users and a lot more developers, I think, before we get there. But I definitely think it's something that we need to start considering now.
Absolutely.
And if these immersive environments are amplifying the impacts, and like Kathleen is saying, that we have brain to computer interfaces, that sounds a little scary if it's a negative impact.
Well, you know what they said in I Am Human, and I don't disagree, is who would have ever known social media would have had statistics of such depression of millennials? Who would have known when social media's pipeline was starting that was going to be the fallout from it? So how do we even begin to know what immersive platforms in their full bore is going to do for us? And, how do you jump ahead of that? So that's pretty solid. I think there has to be enough research collecting all these statistics to be reflected back to us. And obviously corporations from the top down as well as the bottom up in the organizational development, all of this. I had an idea once that because it's so easy to be disposable in immersive worlds, it's so easy to drop your rant and run. It's so easy not to have a corporation respond to you, but when you out them publicly on Twitter, they're on you in 2 seconds. It's so easy to, you know, and it's such a, who would ever think of stooping so low to do that? But that's what you've got to do now, because now we've trained everybody to do that. It's terrible. But then again, I sound like mom in the room, you know, like, oh, wait, we have values here, Gen X. Oh, right. Okay. We got to like not go there because we'll be called out as boomers, God forbid, if we, you know, say anything like that. But for real, I used to call and talk to customer service reps, and you're on the phone with them for an hour and then they just disconnect you because they can, because they have all the power. And I thought, I'm going to solve this. I want every customer service rep to have a rating that follows them wherever they go. So the second I get on with a rep, they tell me if they're a 1-star rep or a 5-star rep. So I know what I'm dealing with already. So how do you have that kind of accountability in just a 2D linear phone format, much less in an immersive space, and have that follow you? Because it's so easy to, you know, name names, call people out, do whatever you want, and you're never heard from again. You can swap your identity. So I don't know where we go with that, because to me, it's a embedded value system of humanity. And, you know, maybe COVID is making us humble.
You know, that's a really interesting point. This whole notion that you can just drop an ID and you know, whether you drop it or it drops you, the platform drops you, but you can then just go ahead and create a new one. And I actually think this is a tremendous part of the problem. And if we bring that to the XR environments, we're not going to have much different than what we have here now. And the reason I say that, well, can anyone tell me how many fake accounts that Facebook took down in 2019? Anyone have any ideas? And you can put your guess in chat if you want, if you're a participant.
It's like jelly beans in the jar.
Someone's got to give me a guess. Throw out something, please.
We're getting some millions, 150K, 100 million, 4 million.
It's zero.
Zero?
It was in the thousands per month 10 years ago when we built voting for AmericanIdol.com. So I can only imagine today.
So I'm going to shock you all.
Okay.
It's 6 billion they took down
Oh
in
my
2019.
God.
And what this tells me is there's a lot of money in fake accounts. And that's because they're used to change people's behavior, whether it's to buy things you wouldn't buy, vote for people you wouldn't vote, be confused when you wouldn't otherwise be confused, do actions. You know, even there's inciting of violence against people on Facebook, and I'm sure that fake accounts have a fair amount to do with that as well. So this notion. Yep.
You can blame gold farming and Warcraft back when on, you know, upping the game there, you know, coupled with, I see bots, yes, of course, but like, how do you even begin?
Well, I mean, I think Facebook took a structural approach to say we want to have frictionless accounts. We want to make it really easy. And so to me, that's a question. Do we want to bring that over to the XR world? And then the other thing, this just to step back a little bit, I think that we don't even have the platform to have the conversation, which where are we going to have the conversation? Okay, we can have it here on this Zoom group. There's 100 people here, but isn't this a conversation that needs to go wider? And I know that they're going to have it over here, and they're going to have it over here, and they're going to have it over here. But how come we can't have the conversation all together? Well, it's because of the way the internet is structured. And I'm hoping that we can solve some of those problems so that we can have conversations at scale, collaboration at scale. And I think one of the really, at least from my perspective, one of the most important pieces is for us to have a shared context. So if we're going to have a conversation about ethics, then I want to be able to understand the full map of the relevant information ecology and at least have that in front of me. And obviously I'm not going to be able to dive all the way through everything, but at least if there's a particular area of that, I can know that here's everything that, you know, people who are looking at this specific little area are thinking about right now with respect to this conversation. Right now, I just don't have that. So anyway, I'd love to hear what people think we can do from the standpoint to even have conversations like this at scale? And can we have the ethical outcomes that we're looking for without having conversations at scale?
I have a pet peeve with the word scale. I think a lot of the wrongs that we've done in our society is because of this passion and obsession with scale. I think there's something unnatural about the way that Facebook, WeWork, even General Assembly, the way they grew and the pace at which they grew. These things are not meant to be done that fast. A single human being is not meant to be having that much power. We're just not built for that. And so I think that there's something really powerful about local conversations as well, and about these conversations that we're having here on Nite LA. And I've given myself to the LA community for that reason, and I've tried to build something independent, autonomous, and influenced by things that matter to me for that reason. So I think that there's something very powerful when you have one-on-one conversations with individuals. Maybe that one of those reaches an individual that's powerful and then can do something at scale. I think that may be more important than trying to think of building the platform by which we all talk, because in reality, we won't all talk. It's just the most powerful will talk. So I don't know, that's my pet peeve.
Well, that follows the same idea of the Clue Train Manifesto way back in the day, the ancient city marketplace, the many-to-many model, that it's not a one-to-many model. It's not about proselytizing and preaching and broadcasting. It's many-to-many, and it's having those local conversations in this protopian era, the age of, becoming, that we're not dystopian, even though we are, and we're not utopian.
I think as we bring I think we're kind of moving towards the individual a little bit, like how are we as individuals able to impact on a larger scale, and by bringing it to a little bit more of an intimate conversation. I think this is a good time to introduce Caitlin. Caitlin and I are collaborating on another project, another panel that we're putting together for Open Air Cloud, by the way, David. And so I know, Caitlin, that you work a lot with bringing mindfulness to technology. And so I'd really love to pepper the conversation with your point of view and kind of bring a little bit more of that aspect in. So you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, absolutely. It's great to be here. And I feel like this context of my work as an experience designer, I work as a consultant. I founded a company called MindWise about 5 years ago. And everything that's been said, it resonates. It's kind of hard to pick up the ball at the end of this huge conversation, because I feel like we're scaling out into metaverse identity and more. But just to put my work in a frame, what I've been doing is really consulting on experience design projects that go into the VR space, some of what Kathleen was talking about in virtual world building. A lot of what I do has to do with reevaluating our metrics for well-being and how people look at everything from relationship building to how people who are leaders and designers of experiences for others would take a team into an XR environment and still maintain great relationships, a feeling of well-being, and also that idea of how we get our minds into a state of flow. So how do we come up with these great ideas? How do we stay very human and also use our human presence to increase our ingenuity and our feeling of creativity? So I'm really interested. I've studied some of the recent neuroscience findings into the brain and how the brain gets into its creative state of ideation. So that kind of led me to study mindfulness from both a Buddhist perspective and also a secular perspective about really ideas about non-judgment and even detachment from one singular point of view or one singular identity. And I find myself continuously curious and fascinated. A lot of what the panels shared so far really struck a chord with me, because I think we're at this, I'm a realist idealist, so I feel like we're at this point right now where there's an opportunity for people to be even more intentional about the choices that they're making, possibly the consequences that the choices have. But I noticed even in our group, when we had the introduction and then we brought up the idea of ethics, everybody's faces got kind of serious and we got kind of heavy, like, ethics. You know, it seems like it's a tough nut to crack. And I think it's because a lot of times in our conditioning, I guess, modern society, we approach ethics from more of a rule breaking perspective, like what rules do we have to follow, and with ethics, what's going to come and get us if we step outside the bounds. So I was just really kind of listening. I think Jonathan also alluded to that, and I guess some of what I'm wrestling with lately is increasing presence, increasing connection, and using mindfulness, which sometimes is defined as embodied ethics. Like, how do we use that that optimism and that feeling of wholeheartedness that people have referred to on the panel? Like, how do we go in with what Arturo is saying in a very optimistic way, but still keep our skepticism and still kind of keep our guard up about how much, let's say, how much we give ourselves over to making choices that might not be in our best interest. Like, I guess the simple question would be, if I say I'm doing something that's VR for good, how do I measure good right now? You know, do we have those difficult conversations about what good actually means, or do we just assume that we all have the best intentions and then we let that flesh itself out in the actions that we take? I'm curious about anything I've said. If it struck a chord on the panel, feel free, because right now it's just, I feel like we're getting to the heart of the discussion. Thank you.
I got plenty to say, but I'm not going to hog the mic.
I want to hear you. Go. Yeah.
Okay, all right, fine. Here I go. Two things come to mind. Number one, the Wisdom 2.0 conference and the C-Care program at Stanford. Are you familiar with both of them, Caitlin?
Absolutely. I'm going to be teaching at Stanford in the fall. So I know the C-Care program.
Yeah.
Working with a lot of, and Wisdom 2.0 is right here in this area. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know if everybody's familiar with it, but when I went to my first Wisdom 2.0 conference in Pandora, and LinkedIn were probably the big showcase companies there. And Jeff, the CEO of LinkedIn, was proud to say at the time there wasn't a single negative comment about him on Glassdoor. And he was far into the company at that point, and the company had grown exponentially. And you're like, for real? So everybody's looking at Glassdoor, that moment. And it was true. There wasn't, whether he had a fixer or not, it seemed very legit. So he was walking the walk, and inside from the bottom up, and same with Pandora. And what I noticed is that if that message of the Wisdom 2.0 conference from corporate could actually broaden itself in immersive, we would be ahead of this game right now. So I'd be curious to know what they're doing in COVID and how they're translating what they did and their success in bringing corporate to Wisdom 2.0. So there is a, what's the name of the officer now in-house at corporations that represent, it's not sustainability officer, it's chief compassionate officer. I want that title. There's a chief compassionate officer at every corporation. And I'm like, okay, that's awesome. And how are we moving the needle? How do we move it in sustainability? Have people tracked those metrics? And the C-Care program, which I had to look it up, the actual name, because I bastardize it, but it's the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford, and Project Happiness, and a lot of folks have come out of that program. But they too are on this conversation, which I think, I don't know how many immersive folks are participating, but I would offer our community to participate more. So thank you for bringing that up, Caitlin. That's what I have to say about it.
I love that. I echo that back too. I think right now they're kind of two separate worlds, but people are starting to see that some of the same conversations are happening here that would happen, say, in the Mind and Life Institute, or they recently had a compassion summit for leaders around the world, especially looking at leadership, because that's where people have the opportunity to make changes that have high stakes. I think just the question right now is about the onboarding, like just demystifying the language of VR and having people feel included, invited. And I could definitely add more if anyone here is interested in talking about it. I think it's a great topic. And right now, it is a time for pivoting, because I think people in that community especially compassion communities, Wisdom 2.0, they have a certain amount of curiosity about how tech could augment and, and really support their goals right now. So I've been involved in that space and actually developing a program that's like Search Inside Yourself, but inside of VR. So it would be training programs with experiential trainings for groups. So watch this virtual space, I guess. Anyone else on the panel? I'm just so curious. Maybe Arturo, I know you have.
I'm super excited about everything
Yeah.
you said. So virtue ethics and mindfulness, I find them super similar, and I often make that connection because in virtue, let's take like I'm learning little by little on this, but for example, there's the virtue of hope, right? And so the idea of virtue is you find this golden mean, right? So it's like how to be hopeful, and so you don't want to be too presumptuous, meaning like say I want to build great technology. Well, I want to be hopeful that I build great technology, but I don't want to presume that I'm a good guy, I'm going to build great technology by de facto. Then I'm suffering from presumptions instead of hope. But I also don't want to be in despair. Oh, it's not possible to make good technology. So there's this constant reflection, right? And so like in mindfulness or when you're thinking of a word and you reflect on it, like virtue is like that as well. You sort of understand a little bit of what's the excess, what's the deficiency, how do I stay in that golden mean? And it's not super straightforward, right? It's an ongoing reflection, like how to stay hopeful. It's an ongoing learning. So you first take in the information, you start seeing what you gauge, and then you live your life and you remember about hope and you remember about these things. So it is a super reflective practice. And I learned a lot about it, like basically by doing meditation, by doing mindfulness. I apply that to virtue ethics, and that's a little bit of how I'm running it. It's not just an intellectual exercise, but it's also a spiritual one. And I do think that a lot of these problems get solved by inner reflection. So that's why I focus on the individual and I focus on the person. If more of us do this and we build technology, the intersection between the two is going to come naturally. And right now, there's people practicing reflective stuff and there's people doing technology. I think there's more of us that need to be in the middle. It takes more work, but it's you're going to have a better life, and I think that's the key. It's like, let's build better technology and live better lives. And just the last thing I'll say on this is I think the most intellectual, beautiful, and the things that really nourish me are philosophy and literature. And I think the most humanist side of ourselves, the most wisdom that we have in our history comes from those things and other things like that. And so in today's ethical discussions with technology, I was just having a conversation with Alex here on as one of the attendees, and he's bringing up science and UX and sort of things that are really good, but also we have to remember our hearts and our beings in a higher way. And so that's why literature, philosophy, poetry, they're just as important to this ethical conversation, and they're just as important to our practice.
I find it really interesting that you brought up mindfulness, Caitlin, because I spent 10 to 15 of my professional years in enterprise level businesses, really like building somebody else's dream and goal, and not necessarily having a personal like wellness strategy, right? And when am I thinking about what I am doing and how I fit into the larger picture? And so I took a leave of absence at one point and actually spent 3 months learning mindfulness meditation and practicing. And I just think it's an interesting note to see like how many of us on the panel may actually already do that in our personal practice, and how that may just be correlated in the type of things we're talking about. And when you share that, and when you share the experience you've had, it's not going to change everyone's mind, but you're going to get more conversation back.
Yeah, I find that too. And I think, I'll just say for anyone here listening who might think, we're talking about formal meditation or we're talking about stress reduction. The nice part for me has been walking through the ambiguity of being someone who started out as a programmer and now has a business, again, kind of like a lot of you were saying, sometimes I think that this group, when I was invited to come today and be one of the moderators, I thought, oh, you know, this is awesome, because I think that a lot of us maybe came to this collective together because we're kind of futurists, we're interested in new mediums, you know, and then right now I feel a great sense of solidarity with groups that are pushing boundaries in VR. And it actually couples a lot with my approaches to mindfulness that are non-prescriptive. It's not linear. For some people, if you feel like it's really hard to sit still, especially right now in this time of anxiety, I want you to know I hear you, like I feel you. A lot of what I've been doing is practicing different storytelling methods, different design methods. So you're kind of infusing those curiosity building, awareness building practices that are part of mindfulness. They're part of that core of really trying to peel back layers. You know, we all have voices in our heads that talk to us, and I think you know, sometimes it's really nice in those practices that mindfulness teaches you. It's basically the concept of everything is allowed. Like if everything's allowed and we don't say, oh, this is, you know, negative, this is positive, then all of a sudden we have more agency and choice about evaluating the intention underneath what we're listening to, what our feeds are. And I think it comes back then to values. Yeah, so for me, everything Jonathan just said is huge. And I'm reading the chat window, and just, you know, for me, I didn't want to commodify mindfulness or make it seem like I was telling everyone they had to go to a mountaintop and find serenity. It's studies show actually when you start to listen and you start to dig deep with mindful practices, your stress level goes up just a little bit at first, because you start to really acknowledge everything that's happening under the surface. But then, you know, as a designer and a leader, then you end up able to respond more effectively to everything around you, because all of a sudden your breathing space becomes more open, the landscape becomes more open. And if there ever were a time to embrace the messiness, I think right now is the invitation. So, you know, I bring that up because my own life is my personal testing ground for kind of fleshing this out. And right now I'm working with a team on a digital therapeutic that has a depression. It's a mindfulness-based VR application that is targeting teen depression and kind of looking at, okay, what happens when you have experience and story design that's actually looking to treat anxiety. I've been on projects consulting with HR teams. I've been working with people who have never used VR before, and they're trying to go into spaces and navigate that complexity of how you would manage a team project across 3 different continents. So sometimes I find that, yeah, right now there's no division between personal life, professional life, but the more we can dialogue about the goal underneath, I think that's where ethics really does come up. And to me, it's not an abstract, oh, we're designing the future. It's project by project. In fact, you know, it's back, I was making notes on Eric's, the Boy Scouts of America, and some of the projects that he's doing. It's like, right now, those projects on the ground, I was wondering, you know, what about creating those levels of rigor and having students feel welcome to really show up as themselves? Like, how are we inviting these spaces where maybe our personal practices are showing up in the work that we create in a really indirect way, so that when someone comes in and they have an experience created by us, they feel welcome, recognized, and invited. So I guess I would just ask Eric, like, how are those values coming out in some of the experience you design? One of them reminded me of Sugata Mitra's, like the school in the cloud, like some of that in VR. I was just curious about any of the values underneath that drove you.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's you know, how the participants are welcomed how they are, how they interact with one another, the agency that they have. Like again, one of the camp counselors was saying that they needed to. Well, first of all, if the participants didn't have some type of agency in the space, then they would automatically get bored and want to leave it, right? So you have to like give them something to actually do, right? And so if he didn't turn on the ability for each one of them to create objects, right, which is, you know, a form of self-expression, like what are you going to choose? What are you going to bring into space? What are you going to do there? Then he would lose them, right? And so that's really one of the things that we are exploring and finding out and navigating as we do these, you know, just first couple of programs. But again, there's all types of, you know, just shared things. Like there's an experience that they have at camp where, in real life camp, where, you know, they look up at the stars and tell stories, right? How can you create a similar experience for the participants and not have that, you know, in nature environment to draw from? Yeah, it's a lot. And then, you know, again, we haven't talked at all about, you know, the issues of safety as well, and how you, how the individuals are conducting themselves and what are the kind of rules, policies, and procedures that apply in real life, and then how you have to account for those in a virtual space. So it's a lot to deal with and to manage, and again, it's you know, it's kind of uncharted waters to a certain degree. So we're, you know, finding our way and we're learning as we go and iterating.
Which means there's great opportunity. I read a study recently saying that people's barriers are, we have less inhibitors when we enter a VR XR space, which basically means the threshold for trust to be built. You can do that more efficiently and faster, but the danger is if we don't hold that as sacred and important, then the relational trust that's our opportunity, you know, then we lose that. And I think we're talking about that here in each of the ways that we approach. It's like ethics. To me, the difference between ethics and morals would be that morals is the idea of the code, and then ethics would be, well, what do I do from there? What's the action? And I think right now the action is the invitation. Like right now, a user can join an environment, and usually in the XR space or the VR space, they start to wonder not just what is my goal or what is my purpose, but also who am I in the space. So, you know, back to this, I find one of the part twos that I'd love to have is a talk too about if anyone's played around with ideas of death or ideas of impermanence. You know, some of the topics that maybe in the Western world we think of as like, oh, that's scary, don't talk about that. But it also gives an opportunity maybe to talk about both our legacy and also, you know, does our avatar have to be realistic? As Raymond's right next to me, you know, it's like, do we have to, in order to be authentic and genuine, do we have to adhere to whatever the limitations are in our physical body, or could it be something where we actually play with that and play with every level and talk about topics that might be I don't know, intimidating, like death.
I'll talk about it all day long with you, Caitlin. I'm thrilled to talk about that subject.
I've opened up a whole new avenue here at 8:20.
Yeah, at 8:20, I don't think we have time for a whole new avenue.
Put a pin on that, as Susan would say. We'll put a pin there. We can always go there. I'll also drop my email in the chat just in case anyone wants to continue these conversations. I love them. Thank you.
Maybe that's the next topic: death and technology. So
exactly.
We could do a whole thing on that, right?
There's that.
In the last 10 minutes, I want to give one of our audience members an opportunity to ask some questions. He's a loyal follower. He comes to all of our, wait, Philip, you just went away. You got to come back. You can't leave. I'm sorry. I was just about to call on you.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, we'd like for you to, we've been putting some great questions in the chat. And
Oh,
you come to all of our events, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to engage with the panel in our last few minutes. And we're going to close with you.
well, getting back to the core question of ethics and morality and going forward, let me just start with the idea that the fundamental architecture of the internet was to avoid any sort of controls. And so as we get more sensory input being gathered, the question is, what higher level mechanism can be put on it to control? And I just want to throw out one thought, and that is that the TikTok mobilization to buy tickets for Trump rallies and then not show up was a way of the TikTok community to impose a moral direction on and change the narrative of an event. And do you think that sort of thing could be a way of community defining morality and ethics, as opposed to any sort of standards for which historically there's just never been any valid and sustainable enforcement mechanism? Do we need to turn to society because government can't act fast enough, and the technology, it's always in someone's interest not to follow the specs? So I throw that out to the crowd. Who wants to go first? Arturo.
I usually am jumping at the bit, but you asked a meaty question. I need to think on this. I don't know if I can answer first.
Bill, will you ask the question one more time? I want to wrap my head around this.
Let me simplify it. Essentially,
that's good.
With any new technology, right, the way the internet is structured, it avoids control. And so if you try to impose a standard, unless you created Internet 2.0, the standard can be bypassed. That's just the history of content protection and everything else. If you look to government to do it, aside from all the lobbying that would fight it forever, government can't act fast enough because technology evolves too quickly. So do you think social movements can impose ethics and morality on the internet? Or do you think that too can't be, do you think that could work?
My gut reaction is look at what's happening right now in all these social action movements. Right. And now it's, how many minutes do we have? It's 8:24. The short answer, Phil, is it's an unbelievable seismic shift in just the cultural consciousness. And it had nothing to do with government, but everything to do with government's reaction or non-reaction, plus the circumstances, plus the environment, plus the time, plus, a generation. There's so much to be said on this, but I do believe that the social action movement couldn't be more at its peak and continuing down this, people are beginning to see the wake and feel it. And now it's so prevalent. You can't get away from it, which is so beautiful. And Eric, I'm going to point to you for 1 second and what you said before, because we talked about this on Saturday. I said D&Y should not be a box that should be checked in a corporation. It should be inherent. It should not be that we have to talk and point to D&I. And Eric, you rightfully said less than 1% of the population of the Black community is in tech. So we still need it, and it should not have to be a box to check. So where do you go with that? I don't, is it just the conversations we're convening? Is it the social actions that are happening? Yeah, I don't know. I don't have the answer, but I'm watching it like we all are.
Sure. Anyone else?
Yeah, and even when there are standards or any sort of like government action, that doesn't necessarily change what business is going to do, depending on how much it's going to cost them, right? Fines are cheaper sometimes than doing what's right. So I do really think that, like, just like the social change we're seeing right now in anything, and especially the accessibility community, you have to have those evangelizers and activists to kick it off at the very, very least.
So given 4 minutes left, let me throw in a wrinkle on that, which is China is top-down control. And TikTok is a Chinese company, whether or not they want to admit it or not. And they, among many others, are penetrating the global community. So can Western ethics and morality dominate going forward? Or do you think simply because China can go in and say the accessible community needs to have, you know, markers on the sidewalk, and you need to put in things for the visually impaired and that sort of thing, they can impose that on a global way? Do you think the Chinese will inevitably win simply because they can mobilize more? Nasty questions, huh?
I think domination and ethics is a weird combination there. I don't know.
Yeah, I think these things are going to continue to happen organically. You know, again, you think about, you know, the Black Lives Matter as a hashtag, and then how it's grown into a movement. If you think about the proliferation of these videos that people are sharing, you know, through virtual space, and, you know, take that another level, going into 3D spaces with avatars, and the ability to share personal and public media against one another. Thinking about what happened, you know, in Second Life, and where you had all these different worlds and islands that, you know, organically, you know, grew their own, you know, rule sets and ethics and values. And yeah, I just think that that's something that's just going to continue to happen. So definitely, you know, the individuals and the subgroups are going to be influenced by the world at large, but ultimately it's going to be it's going to come down to the individual's choices and practices.
So then one final question, Ray. One of our professors, I'm at USC, and one of the professors just left to build his company, which I think is called Pinstripe, which is working to perfect.
Pin screen?
Excuse me?
Is it how Lee pin screen?
Yeah, pin screen, thank you. Which is working to perfect artificial humans and fake personalities, so that he is working very hard to not only get the skin reflectivity and the facial movements correct, but also drivers, so it's indistinguishable from a real person. As we go forward, do you think our Western technology is working against itself by trying to perfect things that make it harder to unite us?
I don't know if it makes it harder. I think it challenges our beliefs on identity and our purpose. And it goes back to intention. So I think if we frame it like that, we don't have to choose if it's harder.
Okay, sounds good.
That's a thought.
Ray, back to you.
Fantastic. Why don't we land this plane, shall we? We're at the we're at the end of our time. I think this is a fantastic panel. Let's even with your mute on, let's give everyone a round of applause, even from home. Fantastic! What a great panel. And yeah, you know, we're gonna have another one of these in September. So September 14th. Where we're going to be talking about some of the topics that were actually brought up this evening, amongst other, in regards to the impact of these technologies on the upcoming election. Yeah, Susan, why don't you close it out for us?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for being here and for coming out, and really appreciated your contribution, Caitlin and David. And so I hope everyone walks away really thinking about how you can be an impact in what we're creating moving forward. So thank you all for being here. Yeah, and thank you, Greg. You're here. We're sporting your backgrounds. You weren't here when we acknowledged you earlier, so yeah.
And we recorded this, so in the next week or so, we'll upload it to YouTube, and you'll be able to watch this again if you'd like.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks,
Awesome.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you for
everybody.
having me.
Great fun.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Absolutely.
Can
Have
you
a great night.
can you capture the chat, please, Ray?
There is. I'm not sure if my personal chat gets kept in that, but I'll weed through it. We'll find the relevant information and circulate it out. If you remember anything in the chat and you want it, just track us down and we'll get it to you.
Yeah, I'm gonna find that article. I know I'm not nuts.
Yeah. Someone asked about the article. She was looking for it and didn't find it.
I know. I was like, it's New York Times. I'm almost positive, but I'm trying to find it myself. I'm like, where the hell did it go?
In case people don't know, at the chat window where you input type, if you click that little 3-dot button, it'll save the chat for you.
Oh, that's magnificent. So save the chat so you don't get my weird PMs about random stuff.
Thank you. That was helpful.
You're welcome. It's too easy. Good night.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Have a good night.